I'm interested in the threats to free speech. We understand, and that this hearing has discussed religious persecution, very, very important. I was a free speech attorney. I've argued the First Amendment before the Supreme Court of the United States, and value what free speech can mean in any society. So I'd like to begin with Ms. Abbas, because you have certainly exercised speech. Whether it's free is another question. You shared your story with us today, of course, before I came, and I understood what that story was. But about 24 of your husbands, Uyghur family, in China were missing, and yet you decided to speak out on a panel here in the United States. A mere 6 days later, as I understand it, your sister and your aunt disappeared. I don't know where they disappeared to. Why, if you were to ask, why did they disappear? What would be your answer? Because that's what I'm asking you now.
They became the victims for my activism or my exercising my First Amendment rights under the freedom of expression, freedom of speech here in America as a free American.
Yeah. So they were targeted because they were your family members. You have any idea where they are?
My aunt was being released 4 months later, but my sister, no, I have no information on her whereabouts and her health conditions. Has been 17 months now. I have no information.
You know, in this country, we speak about chilling free speech, but this is an attempt to kill free speech in a way, I must say, I've never heard before. Your courage is exemplary, outstanding. What impact does it have on others, you think, who may want to speak out, but see what happened to you and your family?
That's what the Chinese government wants.
What is what they want?
To look at me or people like me who are willing to come out and speak, and then their family members are being taken as a threat or hostage. But I have been speaking continuously after my sister and my aunt are being abducted. I hope that other Uyghurs abroad are also speak out, exercising their freedom of speech, because what the Chinese government is doing today, the persecution against the Uyghurs, are racially motivated, and the Chinese government's strategy to building the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Road, is causing destruction in our homeland. Not only the 3 million Uyghurs are in concentration camps today, but none of the Uyghurs in abroad, none of the Uyghur Americans, they can communicate with their family members just using their phones or using internet.
They cannot.
They cannot. The Chinese government is using fear and taking people who are communicating with their relatives abroad to concentration camps. So just trying to scare people of speaking out. Yeah. Basically, China is changing the rule of law and making something like this, this kind of atrocity, the abuse of the human rights as a norm.
I'm not sure there are many like you. Seems to me one could argue just the opposite, that what happened to your relatives will intimidate people from speaking up. Do you think that's the case?
Yes, that's the case for many people. They are not coming forward and speaking out because they see people like me, their relatives are being
very heavy
hostage.
Retaliation.
Yeah.
Mr. Ben Cosme, same question. How does the persecution of religious minorities impact on the fundamental freedom of free expression, free association? We already understand about religion, free expression, free association.
Yeah, I think that often what we've seen and noticed is that freedom of religion and freedom of expression oftentimes go hand in hand. For example, not only in the context of China, but we've seen it in places like Indonesia, where former governor of Jakarta, for simply stating, something about religion, was then sentenced and imprisoned for over 2 years. You're seeing in places like Vietnam, where even just a social media post is creating an impossible task for religious leaders, and their property is being taken away, and many, worshipers are being detained. And so you're seeing that the two go very much hand in hand, and that any appreciation of human rights must support freedom of religion and freedom of expression as well.
Ms. Deutsch, Banya and her husband were attacked because they were humanist writers and bloggers. They weren't speaking, they were exercising free speech in a classic way. As I understand it, they were visiting Bangladesh from the United States when they were attacked. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Is it fair to say that her husband was murdered for exercising free speech rights in an entirely different country?
Indeed.
Are there concerns about what would happen to Banva if she returned to Bangladesh in particular after her vocal activism?
I believe so.
You say what?
I believe so. Excuse me.
Mr. Ben Kazmi, how does persecution of religious minorities affect freedom of assembly and association?
One example is that, to be very specific, Amnesty International, particularly Amnesty India, has been very outspoken on human rights hate crimes against religious minorities. And therefore, anytime Amnesty India participates or mobilizes supporters to go out and protest the Indian government, in the past we've seen raids against our office. We've seen state-friendly media sort of use the media to sort of attack Amnesty India, and also to sort of weaponize it against and say that we're in violation of state sovereignty and sort of a threat to the country. So we've seen freedom of association being used against us.
I can only say how what a service you have done, all of you, in testifying about the rights that were in our very First Amendment, the right to freedom of religion, the right to freedom of speech, the right to freedom of association. I think we will have a greater appreciation for those rights when we hear this chilling testimony from all of you. I want to thank the witnesses for sharing their testimonies to this really shockingly important testimony. You all have demonstrated the scale of the issue, which is so bothersome for us to hear, and why we have held this hearing today. I had another hearing, I had to run back and forth, as there were two important hearings today, but this hearing is a unique hearing as far as for my years in the Congress, because of what you've been willing to come forward and testify about. I do want to emphasize that this was a joint hearing with the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations, and the Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. When you see that this was a joint hearing, perhaps that conveys or signals to you the importance of this issue to members of Congress. We intend to continue to focus on ending global religious persecution, and I might add, persecution and free speech and free association as well.